So good evening, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the second session now of the Sindhanai Book Club. We're thrilled to continue this journey of our critical exploration with all of you. After the rich and quite thoughtful discussion that we had during our first session. So thank you all for those who joined the first one, and thank you for joining us again. For those of you who are new, Sindhanai is an initiative. It's a Global South-led initiative committed to embedding evaluation within collectivization efforts. So Sindhanai means critical thought or reflection in the Tamil language. And our aim is that unlike predetermined and often top-down frameworks, here we're attempting to co-create approaches that prioritize people's lived experiences and collective knowledge, aiming to truly reflect the essence of collectivization. So by focusing on participatory methods and a dialoguing process with collectives, Sindhanai seeks to challenge dominant narratives and create measurement systems rooted in the realities of marginalized communities. So today, as part of this book club, we delve into the works of three transformative thinkers, Gail Omvedt, Frantz Fanon, and Kimberlé Crenshaw, each of whom has radically reimagined the way we think about justice, identity, and liberation. So together, these works demand that we interrogate the systems of power that shape our world, whether it's caste, colonialism, or even the intersections of race, gender, class. So as we engage with these texts, we'll also explore how these insights can maybe inform our contemporary efforts, whether in academia or in social justice work. So today we're very fortunate to have three speakers to guide us through this conversation. Their expertise and diverse experiences promise to bring incredible depth to our discussion. So first we have Trimita Chakma, a feminist researcher from indigenous communities who will reflect on Crenshaw's intersectionality. Then we have Ali Hussain, the vice chair at George Padmore Institute, who will connect Frantz Fanon's revolutionary ideas to ongoing struggles against neoliberalism and global inequities. Then Dr. Elizabeth Joy also joins us, who will unpack Omvedt's vision of Begumpura and its relevance for today's anti-caste movements. So our purpose here is not really to settle on any answers, but to really open up spaces for critical thought, to explore these ideas collectively, and to share perspectives on how we can use these insights to disrupt entrenched systems. So we see it as a beginning of an ongoing conversation. So that's why we also encourage you all to raise questions or comments about these texts and how they might relate to your work or your contemporary contexts. So please feel free to write in the chat box any questions or comments or even reflections that you have during our discussion. So thank you all for being here, and maybe we can just get started. I'd like now to hand over to our moderator for the session, Tom Thomas. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Tarini. And thank you all for joining the second series of the webinar, Disrupting the Colonial Library. Let me open this second edition of the series with a quote from Kafka, Franz Kafka, whose famous quote is, "Many a book is like a key to unknown chambers within the castle of one's own self." That, in a sense, captures the essence of what we call this book club. As Tarini was saying, it's not an attempt at finding solutions. It's not an attempt at scholarly reading of these books. It's an attempt at opening up and stimulate our own experiences and thoughts that we haven't really engaged with or have done it partially. So this is not a didactic venture, but an invitation to dialogue with our own experiences and thoughts. It's not just to take something, you know, mm, without challenging, but to listen and to dialogue with our own experiences and thoughts. And more importantly, look for actionable takeaways that could help us in our own thinking and actions from a global South subaltern perspective. As I was mentioning in the last webinar, the world was and is dominated by colonial literature and thinking. And this colonization was legitimized by several philosophers, thinkers, artists, from Hobbes to Locke to Kant to Kipling and more. And we also know that one of the main drivers of European prosperity is colonialism. And they did it by, what did colonialism do? It looted resources from the colonies as well as used its labor. As Fanon reminds us repeatedly, colonization has been fundamentally, it has fundamentally been violent, not just physically, but also psychologically and structurally. Physical violence is very obvious. We have the white men killing all the aboriginals in Native Americans in America, the Spanish killing the Incas and the Mayans, the English, of course, the aborigines of Australia, and even the French, Portuguese, Dutch. They were also not very far behind, e- both in terms of killing as well as using forced labor. But what's even more critical in today's context and in the context of this webinar is what one could call epistemicide, like genocide, epistemicide. It's that systematic destruction of not just destruction and devaluation of non-Western knowledge systems through colonialism, through capitalism, and even through modernity. This epistemicide is a form of cognitive injustice that erases indigenous, local, and subaltern ways of knowing, ways of knowing itself. So this is something one would then call for epistemic justice to be would be one of the purposes of this series and this dialogue, I would say. Simply put, I think we have been brought up and taught to think using a colonial lens and not our own. Macaulay wanted us to be brown skins, thinking like white men, or what Fanon called the black skin, white masks, and what Ambedkar calls the infection of imitation. So we have by imitation or by training, we have really self-alienated ourselves from our own essence, the global South essence. Here, I would also say that, like Tagore said about our own education system, he said our education has stopped at these temporary halts or pit stops of some knowledge, some degree, some jobs, so on and so forth, and did not encourage us to look at the very purpose of education, which is to make the world a better place. Like Tarini was saying, today we present three authors and their seminal works as an alternative way of looking at realities around us. and to give us a framework that could be a guide to our thinking as well as actions. We have Seeking Begumpura, Demarginalizing the intersection of race and sex, and the Wretched of the Earth. And we are today not doing an in-depth study of these three books. The panelists, we have an excellent panel, and these panelists are not going to be doing an academic discourse on this, but to look for common threads and the connections, be it structural oppression, be it multidimensionality, or the idea of decentering the dominant narratives, putting subaltern or the global south narratives to the center and decentering these existing dominant narratives. And of course, the call for collective action and more. In a sense, these books, they all give us visions of future, even if it is as utopian as Begumpura. Hope, I think, is central to all struggles. And this is something which I'm very fond of, a slogan from student days. This was from the Philippine student movements, which says, struggle is the protest of those who hope, and hope is the celebration of those who struggle. Let me stop by mentioning two concepts from Michel Foucault, his book called Archaeology of Knowledge. First is that power produces knowledge, and knowledge reinforces power. That, I think, is a critical framework that we must keep in our mind as we read anything, whether it is a global south narrative or a global north narrative, that power produces knowledge and knowledge reinforces power. And the second concept that he talks about is that knowledge is not for knowing, knowledge is for cutting. Now, by cutting, he means that the very purpose of knowledge is not just to accumulate, but to use it critically, to really cut through what you read, what you see, be it established systems, ideologies, or assumptions, and to decolonize our minds and actions. That's what knowledge is meant for. With this, let me invite the panel today to help us understand these works and to help us really cut through. Our first panelist is Trimita Chakma, and the book is Demarginalizing the Intersections of Race and Sex. Over to you, Trimita.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you, Tom. So, Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics, was written by Kimberlé Crenshaw, and many of you probably heard of her work, and was published in the University of Chicago Legal Forum in 1989. So Crenshaw is known for, and many of us say it, coining the term intersectionality, which is about highlighting how different forms of discrimination, and specifically in her work, she highlights racism and sexism intersect and overlap and create unique experiences of oppression for individuals who belong to multiple marginalized groups. So she comes from a legal background, and during that time, she was challenging the traditional frameworks of discrimination. And usually the discriminatory laws will focus on a single issue. So there will be a single law for tackling with racism, and another one for sexism. And she was arguing that this sort of single axis analysis fails to capture the complex experiences of those who face multiple forms of discrimination. So this is the essence of it. but I think it's really important to acknowledge the historical and legal context from which she was coming up with this theorization. So this was during the civil rights era, and she was working with the anti-discrimination law. And of course, aftermath of the civil rights movement, there were many significant legal victories, especially for addressing discrimination against Black people. And there is a Civil Rights Act of 1964, but it wasn't addressing the issues of Black women. Also around that time, the liberal feminist movement, which was led by white middle-class women in the 60s and the 70s, they were also advancing women's rights, but they were focused on experiences of white middle-class women and did not understand the unique challenges faced by women of color. The historical roots of intersectionality, even though we always cite Crenshaw, actually goes back to Black women organizing. And in 1977, there was a Black feminist statement published by the Combahee River Collective. And they already called for a development of an integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that major systems of oppression are interlocking. And they called to combat the manifold and simultaneous oppressions that all women of color face. So they already conceptualized it in the late 70s, but Crenshaw was publishing, so she published this article in 1989. And so there are two sides to this story, right? Coming up with this theory, fighting within the white feminist movement and feeling closer to the Black man than the white woman in your struggle, why that is, and also the legal battle. Just to quickly mention that this theorization was very important later on and was foundational to development of the critical race theory, which emerged in 1980s and 1990s. And it's so funny, we are still struggling with that in the Trump era, because for me, it's a thing from the 80s and 90s, but it's so relevant even today. And also in feminist legal theory, it had very good contribution. And those of you who engaged in the UN mechanisms, in the Beijing and in the decade, intersectionality was quite powerful at the time to center the voices of the marginalized groups. I think it's important to define the term intersectionality because many people still today are confused about it. I think in simply how Crenshaw defines it is a way of thinking about identity and its relationship to power, right? And I'll come a little bit later to the politics of identity politics and how that can fragment us, and again, why intersectionality is useful for uniting us. So like feminism, there is no universal definition of intersectionality, but it is maybe simply we can say it's a paradigm or it's an analytical tool or a framework. This is what it is. It's not more than that. It's a tool for analysis. So it's supposed to help us understand how oppressive mindsets, and Tom mentioned this, such as mindsets and systems such as colonialism, imperialism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, ableism, sexism, heteropatriarchy. I mean, we can list it. These are systems and mindsets that create these oppressions, and they are interlocked and they work with each other. And then they also influence the structures through which we experience these oppressions, such as laws, policies, our state agencies and mechanisms, religious institutions, media, and so on. And this is really important because once those institutions are captured, the narrative, becomes dominant. So I think for me, an intersectional approach is to recognize that within these broader systems of oppression, there are specific and unique experiences of discrimination and marginalization caused by this overlapping and intersecting interaction between these systems of oppression. And it really depends on our particular social location, right? And we hear this list of identities. These are some sort of social categorizations that are posed on us in the society, by the societies that we live in. So it's class, in South Asia, caste, ethnicity, religion, sometimes our ability to speak English can put us in a very difficult situation. Like such as international traveling, our sexual orientation, our nationality, our migration status, our refugee status, and many more. So it can capture a complexity of our identity. I want to just share in chat this wheel of intersectionality that you might find useful, because then it shows the relationship between different mindsets and systems, and then the different modalities through which they channel oppression, and then you can see there are different identities in the middle, right? It's in the chat. So I think I will keep it short. If you read Crenshaw's work, she defines intersectionality. She critiques the single axis framework. In her book, she presents 3 case studies that are really useful, and in her time, that was, very powerful, illustrating that how Black women, as workers, when they filed the case against General Motors, there was no way to highlight both their racial status and their, gender. You had to use one of them to address. So it became very difficult to explain their predicament. And there are 2 more through which she illustrates how this, this single axis doesn't work to support Black women. And of course, she also critiques the feminist theory and politics, how it needs to incorporate this phenomenon, in how we, especially how women of color experience oppression, and also that in the anti-racist movements, how they didn't have a gender analysis, which excluded Black women. So she doesn't bring in class as another, but it's already embedded. But I think for us, in this moment in time and in feminism, class is a very, very, very important category that we often forget. Therefore, you wouldn't see, when there is a feminist gathering, you wouldn't see the garment workers coming. I'm from Bangladesh, right? So the garment workers feel closer to their brother workers rather than the other women who are calling themselves feminists. Why? So I think it's important to understand that. And in today's discourse, my main experience has been organizing movements in the Asia-Pacific region. And we have to understand the context before we, universally try to apply intersectionality. So we are characterized by colonial legacies. We have rise of fundamentalisms. These days we call it anti-rights, anti-gender narrative, but it's the same thing. It's the religious fundamentalism, extreme nationalism, these kind of forms. We are seeing military dictatorship. We're seeing financial crisis, and of course, still suffering from the structural adjustment programs, imposed on us by the international financial institutions and neoliberal ideology. So we are seeing, dominant gender regimes and all sorts of pandemics, massive waves of migration. So you can see that if you try to categorize our social status, there are many, many, many categories. And it's even just to do sex and gender becomes complex in this article, right, in this book. But for us now, it's many, 10, So in that sense, intersectionality allows us to analyze it without limits. So I think it's a powerful tool for understanding somebody's predicament. And also, I think it's important to acknowledge that we only highlight the oppressions, all of the disadvantages we face due to our social location, but intersectionality also captures our privileges, right, that we earn through that location. So, for example, a Muslim woman in Bangladesh is a majority, part of a majority population, whereas in a Hindu-dominated India, she might be in a very difficult position, and so on. I'm just giving one example. So experiences of oppression and privilege also work simultaneously as your location shifts. So it's important to acknowledge that. So sometimes, we just use the hat. For example, I'm an indigenous woman, right? I can use that hat and say, oh, so much disadvantage. But, I'm middle class and I speak fluent English. I have other advantages, privileges. So it's important to acknowledge both. This tool has been very useful for especially in organizing international laws in the human rights. I would say we had the, CEDAW, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. So that's in the feminist movement, that is one of the tools we use. And also, I think Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, they also use intersectionality to, explain their marginalization. For me, it's been useful and in designing research and data collection. Then you can use it to make sure you don't exclude certain groups, especially in a specific geographic location. And in, those of us who have worked in the NGOs, social movements before, we also use it to analyze and understand when we do programming and target specific groups to support them. So it's been useful for, avoiding any sort of tokenistic tick the box by, having someone on the panel who is indigenous, right? But not understanding the whole context. So very useful. One final reflection I have is that we have been using this tool and then saying, oh, my oppression is different from yours. Therefore, so we have been fragmenting the movements in some ways. And then different movements are just working in silos. But if you look at that wheel of, that wheel that I shared, and if we analyze a little carefully and critically, you'll see the root causes of that oppression, whether it's coming through 10 systems or 15 systems or 3 systems, it stems from the same structures and same systems and ideologies and belief systems that are on the outside. And so broadly, of course, is capitalism, is colonialism, right? It's racism. And therefore, intersectionality can be a powerful tool to understand that no matter how different we are and our experiences of oppression can be multi-layered and at different levels, without dismantling those systems, we will not be liberated. So I think that analysis is really important for me to build solidarity, that I don't have to experience the same oppression as you to understand that our common enemy is the same, and we need to work together to bring them down, and that our struggles for liberation are tied together. It cannot be separated because it comes from the same set of very few oppressors. So with that, holistic approach is really important. And for me, in this time of this era, this is the main thing for me, to understand where these oppressions come from and how we can relate to each other and power. And I'm very excited that our next speakers will go deeper into caste, right? Because caste is usually not understood by many people. And in a way, it's a system of oppression that is our homegrown system. We cannot blame colonialism for it, but needs to be addressed. And also, of course, Wretched of the Earth, very, very important. Maybe a general lens is missing, but very important to understand the impacts of colonialism and racism. So with that, I will hand back the floor to Tom, and I think we'll discuss more later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Trimita. I think what you underline, that intersectionality is not just a framework to understand oppression, but it is also to understand our privileges. That's something which is missed by most critics, who call intersectionality as if you continue endlessly in intersectionality, you will end up in essence of capitalism, which is individualism. I think you really put the nail on it. And it's not just that framework of looking at oppression, but also privileges. And also it is a call for action. It's not a dominant understanding just for the sake of it. Thank you so much, Trimita. I'll call upon our next speaker, Ali. And Ali Hussain will be walking us through the essence of Fanon's Wretched of the Earth and its liberative potential. Thank you so much. Over to you, Ali.
Thank you very much, Tom. And I'm really grateful and honored to be participating in this panel. And for the book club for extending the invitation. I mean, I think what I will do, I mean, I will read because I usually when I have something under 15 minutes, I find myself writing it because otherwise I'll probably encroach on the time. But so bear with me. But I think it would be accurate if I say that um, uh, one of the points is that whenever Frantz Fanon mentioned, it was always linked with violence and the idea of violence, and always in relation to the book that we're looking at, which is Wretched in the Earth. So the thought seemed to stick that the book advocates mindless violence as a means of achieving political ends. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. And over time, the impression have become an impression that the book is about violence has become a serious impediment to giving Fanon his proper place in the ranks of the great revolutionary and anti-colonialist thinkers. As a psychiatrist, his professional and academic training, of course, enabled him to subject the entire colonial enterprise to an intense forensic examination, not simply focusing on its predation on resources and its destructive impact on societies it has subjugated, but on the deep psychic wounds that it inflicts on individual levels, on both colonizer and colonized. I think what makes his theoretical contribution so valuable is that he sought to establish the proper aim in countering colonialism. Is that it's one of the same as that of the entire project of human liberation. He held to the light the dialectical relationship that symbolized in both Marx and Hegel the worker capitalist and the slave master dialectic, and reworked it in a colonial context. For him, the question of violence and its political framing within the colonial encounter is an element of that reality and inseparable from the struggle for national liberation in general. Although he describes colonial violence as ever present, that every monument, statue, and memorial mark force used in acquiring this land. But he also hints at another distinct form of violence, which he calls symbolic violence, which is always deployed strategically and thoughtfully to advance the cause of anti-colonial struggle. Fanon obviously was mindful of the violence, mindful that violence in a historical sense is simply the continuation of politics by other means. In the context of that period, we have to remember that non-violent anti-colonial movements, particularly in Africa, had been underway for almost 50 years before many of them began to discuss the need to move to armed struggles. From South Africa to Mozambique, militants began to sense that the blowing winds of change after Second World War had ushered a new phase of the struggle. Almost 32 African countries had either become independent or are on the way to be so. And for those governments were on the main headed by leaders with anti-colonial outlook, which gave credence to the proposition that armed struggle is a possible option. The international balance of power produced by the Cold War offered both the political space and the logistical pipeline for arms and materials to flow into the bush. It is no accident that Fanon did not only join the ranks of the movement in Algeria, but also became its theoretical and global avatar in the years to come. Fanon, as a socialist intellectual, naturally held a view on the debate about building about the building of new societies emerging out of colonial and imperial domination, and no doubt aware of the distinction socialist thinkers like Lenin and Luxemburg had made about whether colonialism could be built in a feudal and underdeveloped society, or whether an intermediate transitional democratic reinforcement period is needed. The general consensus was inspired by the then existing socialist models was the USSR and China, in that it is possible under the guidance of a vanguard party for socialism to emerge in a pre-capitalist society without the presence of a strong middle class. But Fanon seemed to hold a view closer to that of Rosa Luxemburg, favoring a period of democratic consolidation. He was equally aware of the weaknesses of the African middle class, which he called the native bourgeoisie. In the chapter of the book Pitfalls of National Consciousness, he outlined the capacities of the African bourgeoisie as unlike its European counterparts, and is bereft of a similar sense of historical mission that would enable it to undertake the comprehensive task of state building and nation building. He saw it as a mere creature of the very colonial system that it is supposed to dismantle. The ethnically based direct rule system imposed by the colonial administration as a way of installing loyal post-independence national governments was riddled with internal division and competition for the meager privileges granted from above. The resulting low expectation setting the collision course with workers and peasants who bore the burden of sacrifice of the liberation struggle. Instead of reaping the benefit of a liberation dividend and better prospect for future generation, they secured neither. Fanon has no illusion about these post-independent regimes and the elites that led them. He did not shy away from calling for their overthrow by the rank and file of the liberation movement before they entrench their power. Although he celebrated the fact of independence, but for him, it is a mere regime change, and that the system remained intact. But the hope for a better future still lingers on in the hearts of millions. The system bequeathed by the colonizer could not function to serve the interest of the colonized, but it did serve the interests of the colonizer long after it had gone. It is too deformed in that respect to be reformed. The most urgent task still is to confront this legacy and to dismantle it through a process of nation building and state building from the bottom up. I think it is this vision of a grassroots of a radical democratic transformation that the book points to. Therefore, anti-colonial struggle by their nature are connected battles in a wider campaign towards a strategic goal of a democratic revolution for human emancipation. Amy Caesar, whose Fanon teacher and mentor, articulated this in his poem, Notebook of a Return to My Native Land. For it is not true that the work of man is finished, that we have nothing more to do in this world, that we are just parasites in this world. For the work of man is only just beginning and remains to conquer all, the violence entrenched in the recess of his passion. And no race holds monopoly of beauty, of intelligence, of strength. And there is a place for all at the rendezvous of victory. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ali. It's it's a difficult task to compress all of that and also liberate him from the this whole misnomer that Fanon is an advocate of violence. But you have done it brilliantly, be it bringing the concepts and very important concepts of, the whole idea of liberation dividend, not reaching whom it must reach, and the independence as a mere regime change, a sort of vertical transition of power from the colonizers to the native bourgeois. So a lot of important concepts that you brought in. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure there'll be questions and we can discuss more on this. Thank you. Our next panelist is Dr. Elizabeth Joy. And Elizabeth Joy will walk us through Omvedt's Seeking Begumpura. Over to you, Elizabeth. You're muted, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Tom. And let me just share my very few slides. Can you see my slides?
Not yet.
Okay, if not yet. And share. Let's see. Share. Can you all see it now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let me go. Just a second. I'll just blow it up a little more. Yeah. Okay. These are just starter reflections on Seeking Begumpura, the social vision of anti-caste intellectuals. Here is the book. This is by Gail Omvedt, first published in 2008. And I'm just going to stop with very few points. Usually we talk about tradition, which focuses or which means passing on from one generation to the other or handing down. But I'm really very glad with what Sindhanai is attempting at. Disrupting the Colonial Library. And by doing that, through the book, I look at these four points mainly. One, the elite intellectuals versus subalterns. And Gail Omvedt brings it very beautifully, especially focusing on Ravidas and his poem, and then the other radical saints. And then she also brings out the contradictions of modernity, and we see the intersectionality of caste, class, and patriarchy. And with that, we come to the utopias, where she says utopias are given birth to by contradictions of modernity, and they involve both reason and ecstasy. So reason and ecstasy become very important in the utopias. And then finally, the development of subaltern utopias. This book looks at the socio-economic vision of the anti-caste intellectuals. And of course, Ravidas, Sant Ravidas, his song Begumpura is a song about the city without sorrow. And Ravidas is a 15th, 16th century poet, saint of Bhakti movement, and born in Varanasi from the Tanna caste community, which is an outcast community. And we see that he sings of his freedom to move anywhere. That is what he is imagining, aspiring. And I think to this day, the Dalits aspire. One of our aspirations is the location, the freedom of location where we can be, where we can move around. And then in contrast to the dystopia of the Brahminic Kali Yuga. So he brings these two things in contrast. And then the location and freedom to move is captured very, very well. And I think that will be one of the important points for our discussion today. And Gail Omvedt weaves together, and then she weaves together the worldviews of subalternate visionaries, as listed out here, leading saints of the Bhakti movement, and then Jyotibai Phule, Ayotidas, Ramabai, Periyar, and Ambedkar, spread over a century, and then contrast with mainly four concepts: the Savarkar, the hard Hindutva, the concept of Hindutva, and then Gandhi's concept of Ramrajya, Nehru's mild socialism, and the communist harder leftism. So for me, I think the questions that I would put before you are three. One is the anti-caste intellectuals, they differ from the nationalist leaders, that is Congress and the Hindu Mahasabha, focusing on cultural nationalism. So cultural nationalism is seen something as not very helpful, rather destructive. How can we address this agenda with the Dalit utopia, referring to a plan for social improvement or change for all? And the second question I would put forth as a starter is, how can India become a true secular democracy, or any nation for that matter, and specifically in India, where conversions and eating habits are not taken as transgressing cultural nationalism? And finally, how can we bring about intercultural competencies in India or anywhere that we are located to promote our humanity? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You've kind of summarized, not just summarized or brought out the essence of Seeking Begumpura, but also asked us to use that, what is in the book, what is the thoughts in that, to really look for actions. How is it going to help us? Which is what the essence of this webinar series is about. And the whole idea of utopia as contradictions of modernity, or what do you call the elite intellectuals versus subaltern, freedom of location, all of that, I think, resonates with what the other speakers have also talked about. And the whole idea of subaltern utopia, what is it going to be looking like? We've had utopia, for example, Kerala's Onam and the concept of Mahabali is an utopia. It is a Kerala's utopia, but it's really an utopia. It's not, it doesn't really have the subaltern elements or the ideas of caste and discrimination and all of that. It's just a dream that it's a discrimination-free world. So thank you for bringing all of that and asking those critical questions. Thank you all, panelists. Now, I do hope that this has stimulated enough thoughts for questions. Please feel free to ask, shoot off any question. There are no right questions or right answers in this. It's just a dialogue for us to really engage with our own self, what we might not have really looked at, and yeah, think. So, any questions?
Tom, before we proceed, there are two questions in chat. So, Shehnaz, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Or if not, we can read it out as well.
Yeah, it can be read out also because we know the presence. Am I audible? Good evening, everyone.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, it's a very, very critical situation today in our country, particularly, and I totally agree to what Ali and Elizabeth and the previous speaker has also said. But my concern, I'm not an academician, I'm a trade union leader. So from that perspective, I'm really, really very much concerned about how we can strategize or how do we proceed with this topic further and take it down to the grassroots level to yield some good results. That is my concern. Thank you.
Any of you can take that question. Who would like?
I mean, if I may throw my
Ali.
comments on this, because I think, I mean, that is a very key question. I think always is that how do you take these issues to the grassroots, and how do you also in trying to build a strategy, an overall strategy, how do you also allow people to access that kind of knowledge, but it's not also about kind of top-down or sideway passing of knowledge. I think it's about an organic engagement of the with the grassroots. If you're talking about the trade union movements, then you're actually talking about what other fora or forums that exist that allows the exchange of ideas and the discussion to happen. What kind of usage people make of recordings of discussions, and what are kind of opportunities are available for cultural activity, for recreation, and for the and also for the kind of socializing that allows that interchange to take place in a direct way. So I think ultimately it's about how that contact is managed and allowed for, and opportunities are created for that kind of because also you can't, you can't. I mean, you have to package knowledge also because it has to be context sensitive. You can't just, I can't talk the way that I talk in certain places. I wish I could sort of have that knack that some people have of kind of, parceling that kind of knowledge in a way that actually could be easily absorbed. And there is also a kind of attention to how we handle pedagogy in also kind of in a way that makes it useful and makes it easier to kind of, to sort of package that kind of knowledge across the piece. Thank you.
No.
Thank you, Ali.
If I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
respond to that.
Sure.
Thank you for your question. It's a very relevant one. For me, I believe that in order to make all our reflections practical, the trade unions, the workers, NGOs, and human rights organizations, all of us, we need to come together and then work together to find very practical solutions. For example, here there is an organization called the Ethical Trading Initiative, which brings together many of the trading companies, where they bring together the brands and then the trade unions, the NGOs, and the human rights organizations. When they are brought together, they work towards achieving goals. For example, in relation to garment factories that you have mentioned, I think day before yesterday, we had a meeting about Bangladesh, the garment factory, and the workers going on demonstration and asking for an increment in their salaries, which is usually done once in 5 years. But they did bring about a change. From the union, they asked for even 15 to 20%. The government was stuck to about 5% something. But yesterday we heard that they have agreed on 9% increment. So probably if various sectors can come together, even there we find working together will bring us to success. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that's a very key question, and what you have, both of you, Ali and Elizabeth, have, I think, outlined is extremely critical. How do we strategize? I think global solidarity is a way forward, and I think though it is in our constitution, the idea of fraternity, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which Ambedkar brought in. He managed to get in fraternity and all of this into the constitution, but not economic democracy, which is, I think, what lies underneath a lot of these inequalities. So thank you for that question and also the responses. Thank you very much. There's one more question, right, from the chat.
Yes. So this question's from Pradeep, and this is mainly to Jimita and Ali. So Pradeep says there are two terms, intersectionality and decolonization, both which I feel have been depoliticized. These terms are now being used by the powerful across the spectrum. Do you agree? What was the problem? Why do we sort of lose these powerful terms? Decolonization was a powerful term in the 1950s, and the same with intersectionality in the 1980s. What is the sort of learning for us? So this is the question. So Jimita, Ali, please feel free to take it forward.
Yeah, I can give it a shot. Yeah, so I think it's everything is everything has been co-opted. I think it's a corporate world problem, right? So now intersectionality is about multiple identities. It's a buzzword. Decolonization, it began as a very specific, concrete political project, right? And it was a material condition changing project. And now in my sector, I see it's become a metaphor. So we are decolonizing curricula, we're kitchen to institution, everything has to be decolonized. Yeah, so we don't really address the material conditions and power relations anymore. So this is how it gets co-opted, some of these radical ideas. So I think it's the problem with the power. It's problem with power and powerful institutions when they adopt these terms, but not really carry the its radical edge, and then it becomes this superficial term. And then now the language itself became a site of struggle for us to try to save those words. But now they're losing the radical edge. So I think there is a group that actually works to reclaim and repoliticize these terms and try to go back, or people are developing new languages to address those. Some, for example, intersectionality, there is another author, academic Jennifer Nash. She critiques it a lot, and because it emerged from Black feminism, they feel quite defensive and territorial about the term. And when it's now taken, everybody has taken over this term. So she's saying let go, let go of it, let it evolve as it goes, and come up with see where it goes and come up with new ideas. It needs to be expanded anyway. So I would say maybe that in terms of decolonization, the indigenous peoples are still developing the idea. And there is this thoughts of decoloniality from Latin America. So we can, I think, still get some out of it. But I would still say, for me, intersectionality, maybe it's time to let go and work with solutions. And to just come back to Shahnaz's point on trade union organizing, I looked into, I've been working with Public Services International to go into trade union organizing. Trade unions once were a force that could stop everything, right? They could go on a strike and stop the whole economic system for a day. So they had that power, people's power, organizing power. So I would say that is still the hope for me, that you can bring people onto the street in huge numbers and stop the world. But from my experience, it also only operates from a single axis and only looks at the labor conditions and forgets the other issues. And because I work at the intersection of, gender, labor, and other, climate, it's very difficult to shift trade unions to challenge patriarchy and male domination and actually look at we need to work together to do the analysis to really challenge capitalism. So this, I think, is the key challenge. But I would say the organizing tools and techniques trade unions have is still a very powerful tool for us to build on. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may.
Ali.
So again, thank you for the question. I think it's an important, really important question. It goes right to the heart of a perennial. It's an old problem, which is really we are often fighting against odds, and there are two problems that I think we have tend to overlook and sometimes tend to minimize until it catches us. I mean, because the kind of liberation project is multi-generational. It's not. I mean, it's wrong to think that it's going to happen in anybody's lifetime when you engage in it. And similarly, is that we're fighting against a system that tends to commodify anything and everything. It can turn everything into a commodity. That's one of the enormous creative capacities of capitalism. It was historically positive at one point, but it's become negative now, and works against the flow of history. And I mean, something that we talked about, I think, in the Institute, when we first set up the Institute, with the help of our founder, John LaRose. He is somebody also who preoccupied himself with that question. I mean, he was of the Frantz Fanon generation, and he occupied himself with that question, which is that he formulated, and we used to say it has become almost a mantra in our kind of network, which is one is that we're not very good at building independent institutions. And I think that is really important. That, I mean, the trade union movement in Europe, for instance, one of the its key achievement is that it is persistence, and it is longevity, because and it's kind of gone from strength to strength, even in periods where it's been kind of encircled and suffered serious blows. And that is because it's managed to build institutions, including a university, Ruskin College in Oxford. I think in the Global South, we have to pay attention to that. So really, it's about building independent institutions so that we do the work that we have to do. Otherwise, somebody's going to just take it out of our hands and commodify it and make either make money out of it or amass some kind of social capital by monopolizing the work. And the second thing is that we have to gain a kind of center the perspective of being builders and consolidators, and don't think in terms of short-term outcomes and short-term goal. And I think those are the probably principles that will at least save us from having to lose these battles in the intellectual front. Thank you.
Thank you, both Ali and Trimita, and thank you, Pradeep, for that question as well. I think it's a very critical one with no short answers, I'm guessing, as we have seen. And I think important aspect which both of them have, both Trimita and Ali have underlined, is this whole question of how do we actually recapture these? Do we let history play its own and let it be appropriated, or recapture it? There, I think Ali's point about liberation is multi-generational and it is not one-off. But at the same time, I think we will need to figure out a way to recapture Che Guevara from being a fashion statement. I mean, Che Guevara was liberational at one point. Today he is a T-shirt fashion statement. So how do we actually bring that content back? And there, I think the whole question of contextualizing each of these concepts, knowing that knowledge is created by powerful and power, and it reinforces power. I think those concepts, I think, are very important. Thank you both. Thank you all three for bringing up that question, as well as those difficult but good answers in terms of how do we attempt to look at this. Thank you. More questions?
Yes. Yeah, we have one from Ahmed. The question is, how close or far are intellectual colonialism and extreme nationalism, or are they completely disconnected?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the question is, how close or far are intellectual colonialism and extreme nationalism, or are they completely disconnected?
Hmm. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I mean, sorry. Is anybody else going or?
No, you can go ahead.
Right. I recently come across this notion. Somebody said that we've been caught unawares that the neoliberal project has been sort of nurtured and grown under our own eyes, and none of us have actually spotted it. And I think the fact is that this is of course a political project. It's not. I mean, it was posited as an economic sort of economic theory, but it isn't. It's a political project, and its aim basically is to disarm the kind of the liberation struggle, and it does so by basically destroying the state as a social institution. And I think one of the serious problems that we kind of overlooked in the past, that actually that's what was one of the function of colonialism. It's actually the destruction of the destruction of indigenous power, even when it's in embryonic form. I mean, people talk about tribes, but actually these communities were self-governing communities in one respect or another. If you look at it in the historical kind of, historical sort of, sense, the question of intellectual, the commodification of kind of intellectual production is, it's makes it possible to actually, if you talk about the concept of intellectual colonialism, extreme nationalism has no international dimension. It seeks, unlike us, it doesn't seek solidarity. It doesn't look at the project of emancipation as that of it's not universal in that sense. Therefore, it is most of the time it actually seeks alliances even with colonialism and with corporate international corporate capitalism in order to enforce its own power within the confine of a national boundaries, and because it has no universal project. Its project is limited. It just subtracts humanity and limits it and confines it within those identitarian categories. And therefore, I would say yes. It's almost the other side of the coin.
Yes, I think in my perspective too, both intellectual colonialism and extreme nationalism, I would see them as quite close to each other, and both are oppressive and destructive and needs to be challenged and addressed. Thank you.
Trimita, you want to add? I see you're typing something.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, and I'm agreeing with both of the other speakers. Yeah, so there is this, dichotomy and the binary thinking in both ways. And they're both dangerous, right? So of course, extreme nationalism we're seeing in India, right? This idea of Hindutva. At the same time, if you look at Georgia, they are saying, oh, anybody who receives foreign funding is a spy. So that's also, it's the other side of the coin, right? And yeah, so, and I think in some of the post-colonial societies, the extreme nationalist groups would impose some of the frameworks that were part of that were sort of that were shaped by the colonialists, right? What is authentic culture? Because they came and they tried to destroy those by sort of labeling them, and very rigid categorization of identity, and also how gender identity has been formed. So you would see the gender binary and the family category is often imposed by nationalists, but some of those were colonial ideas. And if you look at pre-colonial societies, we had more diverse categories. So I think both are kind of hierarchical thinking pattern and just reverse, two sides of the same coin, as Ali said. So we have to resist both, challenge both.
Thank you, Ali, Elizabeth, and Trimita. I'm not going to attempt summarizing what you've said. I'm going to take, it's too tough to do that. Going to take the next question.
So we have one last question from Harika, and it's on chat, and I believe there's some engagement already by Trimita on this. So Harika, if you would like to unmute and maybe ask further to the other speakers as well.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just speaking the views of the speakers, like what's their opinion regarding all the leadership. Not all in case of all institutions and all the nations, but there are some nations that institutions are there, which are just taking the representations of subaltern class or the indigenous class just for the sake of their representation, not for the structural inclusion in their systemic systems and processes. Nowadays we are seeing a lot of conferences and a lot of talks. So maybe in these kind of talks or conferences, they include the indigenous community just for the sake of that conference or that event only. If you go into if you reflect in their processes and their steps, what the proceeding of those conferences are going into the deeper manner. So there are some kind of delay. They do not synchronize in a better manner. So, and a lot of such kind of institutions are flourishing a lot. So it's a challenging situation for not. So it's not a questions kind of thing, it's just a views. And if somebody else can also incorporate their experience of the views or the opinions of other also, that's a thought also.
Thank you, Harikant. If any of you want to add to what he's already said.
I'm very keen to hear from the other speakers, but I need to go in a few minutes. I will just quickly summarize what I said. Yeah, I understand. I think I'm challenged with the same question now, Harikant, and it's just not in those, including someone in the panel as a tokenism, but which institutions should we engage in anymore, and which tables should we ask for a seat in, right? So in relation to some of the UN mechanisms in which we thought we put our hopes, and the United Nations was maybe for the Global South was a bit more hopeful space in the 1970s. But in this current political climate, I'm thinking we are wasting our time. And then you spend so much time, energy going to a space, whether it be the, status of Commission of Women, or you go to the climate conference. And if you look at the result, there is nothing for us, but we spend a lot of energy, time, and money trying to go to those spaces. And even there is no way even to stop a genocide, right? And why are we even engaging? So I've been thinking maybe then we have to discuss, do we engage? Do we even resist and say, recognize us, give us status in this law? And even if they give us a status, let's say I want to be recognized as an indigenous person in my, in Bangladesh, there are no indigenous peoples. Like the state came and they obliterated that kind of stuff from our constitution. Do we spend our energy trying to get the recognition, or do we go do something else, right? Do our organizing. And for example, in India, I'm seeing in Odisha, people, indigenous communities are bringing back millet farming, growing millet that used to be their food before, and after after the, all these GMOs came, it disappeared, but as like a food sovereignty technique, they're trying to bring it up. So maybe invest more time in that, So I also struggle, so I understand your question, but I think this is something we have to address collectively and geographically from us. Do we all boycott this and then we engage in this? Maybe that's the homework for us. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Trimita.
Just to say that, thank you. Again, thank you for the question, or the contribution rather. I think it's we have to be careful in how we kind of analyze this, because for me, I spoke earlier about neoliberalism and its project to basically destroy the state as a social institution, internationally, that is, because what's happening in Africa, what's happening in and now even in Europe and in America. I mean the whole project of dismantling the administrative state is at the center of this project, neoliberal project of basically reducing the state. And why they hate the state? Because the state ultimately is a social institution. Even if it is in the hands of those who oppress us, at the end of the day, it's if we look at what happened in the first half of the 20th century, the state has delivered under social democratic regimes have delivered a great deal, and those kind of renewed social contracts of the welfare states and so on were not possible without access to the state. That those social democratic parties who followed the parliamentary rule, and of course that's the impact of the pressure from below that pushed the state to achieve those things. And if we don't have the state, we have nothing to pressure in order to deliver for the rank and file and for the majority of ordinary people. So I think that's and never forget actually what one of them had said. He said our project is to reduce the state so that it's small enough that we could drown it in a bathtub. So that's, I think, is also reflected in how international institutions are kind of now kind of sit, because really they are, in a sense, they are a conglomerate of states, and maybe not the best talents always kind of in the places that we come from, given the regimes that we have. Not the best. The best talent don't tend to float to the top. But we have to continue to pressure. We have to continue to gain, to at least to claim some grounds that we've lost in the last 50 years since Thatcher and Reagan kind of came into the scene, and make good use of our civil society and of our trade unions in order to challenge those kind of forces, those reactionary forces that are actually dismantling the international rule-based system. Because yes, I mean there is a mention of genocide and how it was ignored, but at the same time, the only voices that are now kind of stacking up against what's happening are actually those international institutions that were built after the Second World War, and they're a new kind of vision of the global community, a much more humane vision after the Second World War. But we kind of risk losing it if we do not engage powerfully and meaningfully with these institutions, because they actually belong to us. In a sense, they wouldn't have been instituted without the pressure of the global south, particularly of the anti-colonial movement and the pro-independence movement that actually made those institutions meaningful and deliver at least the minimum gains that we got in the last century. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali, Trinita, and Elizabeth. It's been a really very, very enriching conversation. And thank you all the participants for being around this long, and also those pertinent comments and questions that you've asked, which made this webinar really a meaningful one. I'm not going to attempt at summarizing what all the richness that was there in this today's webinar, but I think just as the last point really brought us back to the question of, okay, how do we use this? What are the action points? How do we move forward? What are those critical takeaways? I think there are several. Each one of you would have got or unlocked those chambers, as Kafka says, differently and in your own context. But like Ali was saying, this whole neoliberal project of destroying the state as an institution, and like they say, answer to bad decentralization is not no decentralization, but more decentralization. So similarly, I would say answer to bad state is not no state, but more state with caveats of participation, democratization, etc. You can apply that to anything. Answer to bad trade unionism is not no trade unionism, but I think more trade unionism, what it stood for. All of that is applicable. And as many of you have pointed out, I think it is important to go back to our own concepts of what is the global south ideas of time, relationship, objectivity, and more. And instead of also, Trinita was saying, instead of wasting time in those what one would call invited spaces of global capitalism, instead of wasting time in that, look for creating our own spaces, be it the millet movement, be it the 100 miles movement, where you would say that you would only procure things within 100 miles of your living, be it the local currency movement, which encouraged exchanges within the local area and not outside of it. Several such movements around the world, which are looking for alternative ways of doing things, alternative ways of imagining the world. And that, I think, is extremely important. And building solidarity across these movements, solidarity and fraternity across these movements, I think is extremely critical. Thank you, everyone, for joining this webinar and those excellent inputs. I think Tarini has an announcement before we close. Back to you, Tarini.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I think the short announcement for the next webinar that we have of Disrupting the Colonial Library. So we're changing the session slightly in terms of the structure of it. We're going to be focusing in on one theme. We're going to be looking at labor and capital and how that's shaped global histories. So we'll have a speaker talking us through different seminal work and different books that have spoken about labor and capital, hoping to ground our views and perspectives on this through that. So I invite you all for that session, and maybe if you have ideas for books that should be covered, you could please join and let us know. And thank you all again for joining today. It's been great and so enriching to hear everyone speak, and the Lovely questions that we've had today, very engaging. So yeah, thank you all. And we hope to see you on January 15th. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye, everyone. Thank you.